Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you here tonight to this latest installment of the Mixed Media Speaker Series. We've also partnered with Master of Fine Arts and Community Arts program and their Power Speaker Series to put this together. I just want to mention that the Mixed Media Series is a series that brings high-profile, globally recognized artists, designers, scholars, curators, and educators working at the forefront of their fields to MICA's campus for public talks, in-class presentations, studio critiques, and other immersive activities with students and the community. The aim of the Mixed Media Series is to build important and imaginative public events that address the diversity of practice in our fields and the complex relationships between art, culture, identity, politics, and belonging in the contemporary world. I just wanted to take a minute to sort of talk about how this panel came to be. Just a few years back, I'd met Sheri Parks a little before that one and brought her in to be on a panel discussion we had related to an exhibition here at MICA called Baltimore Rising. That exhibition addressed a lot of the issues related to and building up to the death of Freddie Gray. And then we had a series of panel discussions related to that all seemed to fall right around the election of Donald Trump. And through those conversations, a lot of what we talked about was sort of what kind of action would artists take, or what kind of ways could art affect the world. And so not long after we were having those conversations, I remember just being on social media and seeing a post from one of the artists on the panel, Amir Fallah. And Amir was in the midst of traveling back from an exhibition that he had had in Israel. And it just so happened that, no one knew this was coming, but that was the same day that the first incarnation of the travel ban was launched here in the US. And so I remember seeing Amir's post that talked about him just being sort of trapped and not feeling welcome coming back to his own home, and the idea that he was in the brown people holding room at the airport. Just that really stuck with me, and I wanted to find a way that we could actually have a conversation. Obviously, since then, things haven't necessarily gotten better. But I think that it's really important to be able to hear the voices of immigrant artists and sort of what they deal with and their experiences and what they can share with us about that world, because not all of us are going through those same experiences, but we definitely want to reach out and work with them any way we can. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic to Sheri Parks, who's going to be our moderator tonight, and I will let her speak to you and introduce the artists. Is it on?
Okay, you have to turn your mics on. Thank you, Tony. Now that I'm at MICA, for those of you who are not at MICA, I work here now. And I am Vice President for Strategic Initiatives, and I thank Tony a number of times because I consider that moderating to be my audition for MICA. So here I am. What we're going to do first is I will introduce the artist, and then he or she will, we have slides of their work. We'll talk about their work for between 5 and 10 minutes. So I'll introduce, slide talk, introduce, slide talk. So we go, and then we'll discuss some general questions for a while, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So that's the outline of our evening. And so first, and we'll go in order, so it's easy to keep track, is Amir Fallah. Considering himself primarily a painter, despite also working in sculpture, installation, and photography, Amir produces deeply personal figurative work steeped in childhood memories, formative experiences, and cultural legacies. He describes his range of subjects as including punk rock, falling in love, the similarities between cacti and love, first kisses, Persian miniature painting, psychedelic imagery, Skid Row tents, Al-Qaeda bunkers, collaboration, refugee camps, gardening, space, ... 12 years of graffiti art informs his additive approach to painting and sculpting, which leads him to, quote, put things on top of one another instead of forming objects or blending paint, or I'll add fabric, I'll add furniture, because you do the same thing. He received his BFA in Fine Art and Painting from here, MICA, and his MFA in Painting at UCLA in 2005. Amir, and your mark.
Thanks for having me, guys. You know, what's funny about the bio is I actually think that's from like the early 2000s. And I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I guess my work was about that stuff.
It's on your website.
No, that's not on my website. If it is, whoops. But anyways, most of my work these days is dealing with portraiture. I've always been a big fan of documentaries, and I actually used to watch them at a theater, a little indie theater right here, Charles Theater, all the time. And in a way, I guess my paintings over time have kind of turned into functioning a little bit like documentaries, but more like coded documentaries that you kind of have to unravel visually. So for every work, I start my process by going to somebody's home. They're always paintings of real people. For instance, in this one right here, it's a friend of mine who's Lithuanian, and I'll go to their home and then we'll just start having a conversation about some of the materials in their home. It could be everything from the rug that they have in their house to little like pieces of decor or clothing. It could be a couch cushion. And we'll just start talking about the origins of these things, where they got them. And usually these mundane objects lead to very personal discussions about their family. For instance, this old school telephone that she's holding was a phone that she remembers using as a child in her grandmother's house in Lithuania. And so on a recent visit, she brought the phone back with her, and it wasn't even plugged in. It was just like it had just turned into this like a relic of the past. But also it was charged with the memory of her family. So anyway, I'll go to somebody's home and we'll do this kind of informal interview, and it's almost like an archaeological dig of their lives. And I'll take some of these objects and fabrics, and I'll create a still life of sorts around them, and then photograph them. I always photograph them with their face concealed in some sort of fabric. And that idea actually came to me very randomly. One day my wife was sitting on the floor folding laundry after we had come back from a vacation, and I walked into the room and I just saw this mound of laundry with these two hands and feet behind it. And it was just a weird image, and I just pulled out my phone real quick, took a photo of it, and I printed it out and kept it in my studio. And after a couple of weeks, I realized why I liked that image. The reason was that although you couldn't see any of her real physical features, it was a portrait of my wife, because I could, through the patterns and clothing and the fabric, I could connect them to different moments in our history. You know, like there was like a dress that she had worn that I remember when she got it or where we were. And so it started like that. So I'll cover the person with some sort of fabric. Usually it has some sort of pattern. Sometimes I make up the patterns. I'll make a new pattern, and then I'll take those photographs, work on them in Photoshop, create a composition, and then ultimately paint them. And then this is a fairly new one. And these newer ones, I'm doing sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 paintings of the same figure within one painting, and there'll be these small vignettes. It's almost like a painting within a painting. And this kind of like a structure comes out of my interest in graphic design. and book publishing, which when I was at MICA here, I started a magazine called Beautiful Decay, and I did the layout for it for many years. And so the paintings are kind of compose how I would, I kind of use a design grid. I kind of create a hierarchy of what I want the main headline to be, and little smaller articles. I kind of think of them as how I would used to lay out magazines and books. I think that's a good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. All right. So, Aliza Nisenbaum is a painter living and working in New York. She is best known for her colorful paintings of Mexican and Central American immigrants. She was born in Mexico City and received her BFA and MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She's been a resident at a number of places, including the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Artists in Residence at the University of Tennessee, and So Much Summer, Mexico City, and fellowships and grants include Fellowship for Immigrant Women Leaders from the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. She's also been a participating artist at the Immigrant Movement International, Corona Park, Queens. She's been widely reviewed and is included in the book Vitamin P3, New Perspectives in Painting. She is a professor at Columbia University's School of the Arts.
Microphone. No, hello.
There it is.
Good. Can we have the first image, please? So this is a painting I started with one family that I've been painting for over the past like 6 or 7 years. Veronica, Marisa, and Gustavo were a family I met while teaching at Immigrant Movement International, and since like 2012, when I was working there, I was teaching and volunteering and giving a class to women, kind of a feminist kind of art history class, and I got to know my subjects really well through teaching this class. And so I use kind of the focused attention of like observational painting to spend time kind of mutually witnessing various people that I work with in extended ways. So I've been painting this young woman, Marisa, from the age of 10 pretty much till she got to college recently. And this is one time that they invited me to their home. Marisa and her family are from Puebla, which has this tradition of talavera, which is a certain kind of ceramic that strangely obviously has an immigrant history, even that craft from like Spain and Portugal, and ended up coming to Mexico. So sometimes my paintings are kind of like montage in some ways. We have lots of similarity of like the contingent situation in which my subjects find themselves, like Queens, where they live now, and the place where they might be from. Maybe, can we have the next slide? Then this is my most recent project. This is quite a jump, but I was thinking a lot. I had a show recently in New York, and I was thinking a lot about how people assemble, how groups, thinking about Fred Moten and how different, how we rethink our modes of assembly, how people come together in their workforce or in their place of leisure, and what they do when they come together, and how they rethink their way that they assemble. And so I was going to this one salsa dance club in New York called Gonzalez y Gonzalez for a whole year, going dancing, thinking a little bit of Alice Walker, of like how difficult times require furious dancing. So I would go with some friends of mine and we would just go salsa dancing. And I got to know the dancers that sometimes kind of teach classes there and document their lives as well. So this is Jimena and her partner in their home. Can we have the next one, please? Let's see. Oh, these are a group of women that I painted in 2000, I think 15 or 16. They were all residents for this one residency I did with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs under Obama, obviously. And so I painted each one of them from life. And I think a lot about, I spent this time with these women, and I put a poster in the background that was from like a historic Mexican printmaker, Rafael Vázquez, that did these prints of women like marching towards their labor union, So oftentimes there's some kind of history that might foreshadow foreshadow like what this group means, but I think one of the most important parts of my work is that I paint from life. So there's that kind of materiality of sitting with a person, the kind of conversations that happen, the time I spend with them, which is sometimes from 3 to 6 hours, and the kind of mutual conversations and witnessing that we have in that time, like their materiality and my translating in some ways the chemistry or the feeling I get from that person through paint. Obviously, it's a very old-fashioned thing to do, but just I think there's something to that kind of attention that's unlike the ways we interact with people otherwise. If we could have the last one, I don't know if there's. Oh, this is again Veronica and Marisa. I painted them once, and then I came back to the painting a year later when Marisa had grown and she wanted to be posing upside down like that, with a Virgin of Guadalupe calendar in the background. Could we look at the next one? Okay, and this is the last one I'll talk about. This last spring, I was in residence in Brixton, in England, in London, and this was a subway station, the Brixton line, which is the hub of the Victoria line in the south side, in the south edge of London. And so I painted 15 subway workers, and my studio was located inside the subway station, so the public couldn't see the work being made, but everyone that worked in the station, from the cleaning staff to the managers, they all could see it come into fruition. And I painted each one of them from life, and they all told me their opinion about Brexit, which was super interesting. That even though our political opinions might differ, what it means to sit with somebody and have that kind of face-to-face discussion, and how that kind of opens up all kinds of different ways of interacting that sometimes we face in social media, where it's like this kind of road rage type of conversation. So the painting is kind of like all the temporal experience that you have as you go into the subway, like the mind the gap yellow line, and then once you're inside the subway, the floor, and then each one of the sitters. That's a nod to Van Eyck's Arnolfini Wedding, which is my favorite painting in the National Gallery there in England. Have I gone on really long? I'm going to cede the mic.
As an immigrant and a daughter of a seamstress, Aram Sifuentes learned to sew at the age of 6. She's now a fighter, social practice, and performance artist who works to claim spaces for immigrant and disenfranchised communities. Her work often revolves around skill sharing, specifically sewing techniques, to create multi-ethnic and intergenerational sewing circles, which have become a place for empowerment, subversion, and protest. She earned her BA in art and Latin American Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Then she did a Post-Bacc here at MICA. And then she went on to get an MFA in Fiber and Material Studies from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work's been exhibited in a number of venues, including the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, the Asian Arts Initiative, and the Chung Young Yang Embroidery Museum in Seoul, South Korea. Aram has been a Smithsonian Artist Research Fellow, a 3 Arts Awardee, and a Sustainable Arts Foundation Awardee. She is currently an adjunct associate professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. And we're about to see images that include her protest banner lending library.
Great. Thank you. First slide, please. Yeah, I like to start a lot of talks with this banner, right? I'm an immigrant. I came here to take your job, but you don't have one. And that's all I have to say about this piece, actually. Well, a little background is that, I was born in Korea, and we moved to the Central Valley in California when I was 6. And so growing up in the Central Valley, really informs my work, I think because seeing a lot of, being sort of in the heart of like farmland there, right? And seeing the migrant workers and sort of immigration and immigrants just being everywhere. And so, I always had this interest in immigration policy, and I actually thought I was gonna be an immigration lawyer, but then here I am. And so this was me taking a banner back home and posing on the side of the street by some farmland, right? I got pretty scared, so I left quickly after this photo. But it is Trump land after all. And yeah. Next slide. So with this project, the Protest Banner Lending Library really came about with the election of Trump, right? And so seeing all these protests happening and wanting to participate, right? And participating in the way that I knew how, which is to create textile work and sewing. And I wasn't a citizen at the time. And a lot of my previous projects, I work with non-citizen immigrants of color and making a lot of projects with them. And we started making banners together. And we realized that, okay, like we made these really cool fabric banners, and like I had these crazy fabrics around because why wouldn't I, right? And so yeah, this like pug fabric that has Dump Trump on it and things like that. So we were making these like really fun, beautiful banners, and then sort of realizing like, wait, there's a protest tomorrow. Can you take it? No, I'm undocumented. There's no way. Or like, can you take it? No, I have a small kid. Like I can't. I don't want to risk that. And like just kind of realizing that like so many of us couldn't actually go out to protest and like take out these banners. And so that's how the project started, where I was like, well, why are we even making these when we can't even take them out, right? And thinking through that problem. And so then I decided, okay, with these banners, what if we make a lending library of them, right? Where people can like come and check them out. And so, and then also, bringing awareness to the fact that a lot of people, that going to protests is a privilege, right? Because like, this neoliberal rhetoric, this Western liberal rhetoric of like, let's all go out and protest, right? But we don't have this conversation of like, who is that space safe for? Right? And so I started doing this project where teaching people how to make protest banners, and it's open to the public, and then people can either take them or donate them to the lending library. And then if it gets donated, then obviously people can come and check them out, right? So use is really important to my projects and my work. I think the next slide, please. So this project was in 2016. It was before the Protest Banner Lending Library, and sort of led up to it, was that equally coming from the same place of like, we all have to go vote, right? And that rhetoric, and being really frustrated and feeling frustrated that we weren't having conversations about who can't legally vote in the United States, right? So in 2016, I created a project called the Official Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't, where I collaborated with over 15 artists, activists, organizers all over US and Mexico, and we created these fantastical, imaginative voting stations, particularly for people who can't legally vote, right? In 2016, more than 28% of the population could not legally vote. So that's more than 92 million people. So it isn't good, this conversation of like, let's go change things and let's all go vote, right? Of course that's important, but let's also recognize that 92 million people can't legally vote, right? And so a lot of my works are sort of like bringing attention to the disenfranchised, and particularly like immigrants of color. And for the 2020 elections, I'm doing this project again, creating voting kits for the disenfranchised. So next slide, please. Yeah, this is another image of the Protest Banner Lending Library. Currently, we have over 500 banners in the lending library, and they get checked out constantly and used. And different, like satellite libraries have opened in various cities. And so in Baltimore last year, I came here because we did this project at Cardinal Space. Next slide. And so this is sort of similar in the language of banners. Again, thinking about textiles, thinking about home, thinking about safe spaces and use. I started creating these curtains with statements to the police on there, right? That asserts your rights, right? These are red card statements. And so thinking about if police and ICE show up at your door, this sort of act that you could do of like closing your curtains and making them read your curtains. So like, it's petty, but I like petty. And humor is really important to my work. And yeah, and I wouldn't say this is humorous, but sort of the act, right, is like this empowering petty action of like, I see you, read this, go away. I think that's the last slide, right? Cool, thank you.
All right. Guadalupe Maravilla, in 1984, at 8 years old, Guadalupe immigrated alone to the United States from El Salvador in order to escape the Salvadoran Civil War. He was part of the first wave of undocumented, unaccompanied children to come to the U.S. from Central America. Became a U.S. citizen in 27. And in 2016, as a gesture of solidarity with his undocumented father, who uses Maravilla as his last name and his fake identity, Maravilla changed his birth name from Urban Morazan to Guadalupe Maravilla. He creates fictionalized performances, videos, sculptures, and drawings and incorporate his pre-colonial Central American ancestry, personal mythology, and autobiography. Through his disciplinary studio practice, he traces the history of his displacement, interrogates the parallels between pre-Columbian cultures and our border politics. He's performed and presented his work extensively, and with everybody, I'm just mentioning a few, at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, El Museo del Barrio, Central American Biennial, and a performance at Knockdown Center and Central Performance at Knockdown Center in spring 2020. Awards include Guggenheim Fellowship, Soros Fellowship, Art Migration and Public Space, Map Fund Grant, and Creative Capital.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to MICA and everyone for the invitation, and also the panelists. I'm happy to be here with you guys. Okay, can we just run my slides just randomly? I'm not going to talk about them particularly. I guess I will start by talking about where I come from. All my work is autobiographical. And basically what was said in my introduction, I was part of the first wave of undocumented children to come to the United States in the 1980s. And I've grabbed a lot of information from my own experiences to make my work. And that part of the introduction covers just a half of it, right? The other half was that in 2012, I had cancer. And after doing a lot of work and a lot of research, I decided to work with Western medicine and look for alternative ways of healing. I did chemotherapy, radiation, 2 surgeries, but also worked with healers, shamans, curanderos from China, Tibet, from Korea, from Israel, Native Americans, Mexicans, Central Americans, and everyone in the Amazon. I learned all these ancient ways of healing trauma, because the more I got into it, the more I worked with the healers, I realized that the trauma that I had and from being separated from my family, escaping violence, came from this trauma that I held in my gut and manifested into a cancerous tumor. With that said, I obviously then after that I had chemotherapy, radiation, 2 surgeries, and all that Western medicine. But to make sure the tumor doesn't come back and to recover from the radiation, from the chemotherapy, I use a lot of indigenous healing plants, or in some cases I use kambo, which is the poison from the frog from the Amazon that resets your body. I work with sound therapy. I learned a lot about that. Acupuncture, like just pretty much from every continent, I picked up a healing practice along the way. So a lot of the work that I do, whether it's a sculpture like the one you see here, is when I go back and I retrace my migration route. I go back to cities in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Honduras. It was a 2.5 months journey from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, all the way through Mexico to Tijuana. I was 8 years old, and I had the help of many coyotes and many families to get me to cross the border, escaping violence, right? It's not that much different what's happening right now. It was a different type of violence. But so with my, I've been 6 years cancer-free now, and as I talk to my immigrant community, I realize that the ones that are documented, there's a lot of trauma there that goes untreated because there's such an urgency at the border of like, okay, can we get them here to safety, right? But the conversation is not being had about those immigrants that are documented, have been here and they have jobs and they have their daily lives here with us. Wouldn't talk about their mental health, right, and their physical health. So I started noticing that a lot of my family members and documented immigrant community, they're very sick, right? They're feeling sick of all levels. And from my own experience, I realized that if there's trauma that goes untreated, our spirit gets broken and it can cause different types of illnesses. Not that everyone that has trauma is going to get cancer like I did, but it can manifest through depression and many other illnesses, all types, right? So in 2019, I started this healing center. They're actually more like healing workshops in New York City. It's called Spirit Level. And I start doing sound baths for undocumented immigrants, and I bring in different practitioners that we teach immigrants how to heal themselves. We're not there to heal anyone. We're just showing them the tools to heal themselves. Some basic things like meditation are taught. I bring acupuncturists, herbalists, mycologists, nutritionists. I bring someone that does Tai Chi. Someone from the city of New York that talks to us where to obtain organic produce that are affordable from the farmers markets, and so on, right? I'm actually bringing curanderos from the Amazon, the ones that work with me, and we're doing some sort of cleansings in the space, right? So this is kind of like what I guess it is my social practice project, but it's also very connected to my own practice. So I also make these like really large-scale performances where I tell my stories. I'm actually doing one, if you're in New York City on March 14th, I'm gonna plug my show at Knockdown Center. And this performance is actually going to be, it's part 3 of the trilogy. And it's a piece about cancer and about sound and sound therapy, right? So I'm actually bringing a curandero from the Amazon that's going to sing songs from the Icaros. I have a band from Mexico City that I'm flying over. I'm co-writing the musical score with them. I have a family of performers that are portraying undocumented immigrants, because I don't use real undocumented immigrants in the performances because I don't want to put them in harm's way. They're portraying a family of undocumented vampire immigrants that are here to drink blood of Americans that only eat meat. I have a pair of border crossers from the future that are going to be there. I have a pixelated goat that's going to be part of the performance. I have a giant purple cloud in the space that's going to be hovering above us. And I also have a family, a troop of quinceañeras that wear black because they're mourning. And on top of that, I'm actually going to have a conversation with a 10-foot by 10-foot piñata that represents my tumor, and I'm going to have a conversation with it. So if you're interested, come on down. Thanks.
Thank you all. Right. So I'm going to ask some questions, but this is a conversation, so feel free to jump in. I'm not going to call on people unless we feel like we have to. But I will ask the first question, and as what everybody just suggested. In the age of Trump, we focus a great deal on the border and much less on the lives of people once they come to the United States, because the assumption seems to be it's happy ever after that, because you come to the promised land. And I want to ask you, as either an immigrant or the child of an immigrant, how that experience helps you to say what you feel you need to say. What does that perspective do for your work? Whoever wants to talk. But somebody should talk.
I remember being in my class. I teach at VCU, in VCU sculpture, and I remember being in my class the day that Trump got elected, and we decided not to have class. We sat in a circle and we just talked about what just happened. It felt like, someone had died or something that day. I'll never forget it. And from there, I started seeing my students become more brave with what they were doing, like making themselves more vulnerable. But also started happening to me, right? Like I kind of refrained from talking about my experiences, even the cancer, which wasn't, not too long ago. But I had a sense of urgency to speak up about how immigration impacts me in general. So I think that was almost like something that kind of pushed me to the spotlight to talk about it.
I can chime in. Actually, I realized during my introduction I didn't actually say what my work was about at all. So just really quickly, they're portraits of people via the objects that they surround themselves with. And I was interested in what happens when you hide somebody's gender, age, whether they're attractive, not attractive, their ethnicity, and how do you create this alternative way of describing who someone is? Because historically, portraiture is about the physical features of someone, what they look like, right? And when I first started working in this manner, I was just painting friends, so it could be from wherever, it could be white or black, or Asian, from Iran. But after the experience of getting held at the airport that Tony mentioned earlier, that happened January 28th. And I had a show, I think, planned around April, so a few months before that. And I had already started making this new body of work for it. And after that happened, and on top of Trump getting elected, I also had a newborn baby who is multiracial. He's half Iranian, half Puerto Rican. And all I could think about was my place in America and like what it means to be an American. And before that, I did a whole show about Henry Rousseau. I did a whole show that was kind of like a portrait of Henry Rousseau. So it had nothing to do about my personal story. It was a portraiture, but it could have just been about any French, Caucasian painter, just anybody that interested me. But after all these experiences, I realized I just wanted to talk about the stories of immigrants. And so kind of in the same way that you described your students, I felt the need to make something very personal. Not because I thought it could change the world or push my personal beliefs or agenda forward in some way. Unfortunately, I don't know how effective painting is for political action. Maybe other forms of art, perhaps, but I don't know. I think painting's powerful, but not necessarily politically powerful. But I wanted people to at least think about things, and I wanted to tell authentic stories about people who were in the same position as me. So I started almost exclusively painting fellow immigrants. And so I've done a body of work about immigrant families, biracial families, kind of trying to paint a portrait of their complex histories and backgrounds, and such as my own.
Do either of the other painters want to respond to that question about the political power of painting?
Okay, no, yeah, you don't paint. Let's see, is this on? I mean, I'm torn because I feel like painting has historically, except for the Mexican muralists, been a very private act in some ways, and but I think that I think the power of representation is extremely powerful, and also representation in institutions and how painting enters into, the power of kind of seeing yourself represented is one thing, but it's not so much, in my process, I'm interested kind of in starting from the kind of microcosm of the people I work with and that kind of mutual witnessing, and then engaging with larger structural things as the painting enters into the world and as it enters kind of the market and as it enters into kind of an economic market, and thinking about how at the start, like, my models used to be kind of more engaged with the presentation of the work, and now because of fear of sometimes visibility, I haven't been painted undocumented immigrants anymore. Only in 2012 was when I did that, and then in Brixton, this was like a public mural, which each one of the people had been working at that station for maybe 30 years, some of them, and never having been seen, even though they work as facilitators for that station for so long. So I think painting has very powerful political.
Can you also talk about, this is something I was curious about here in the conversation between the two of you anyway, about energy.
Energy.
Guadalupe certainly talked about energy, and we're going to get to that. But you talk about the energy exchange between you and the people. You really, it's not investigate, you go with the people you paint. You go into their private spaces, their homes, their lounges, and you play games with them and eat food with them, and you talk a lot about that energy that's going through my head. That's what I heard. And so you really are, I think, and you can feel free to disagree with me, that you're speaking with them. Or is that what you're trying to do?
It's in some ways a collaborative process, because it's, painting, many people don't know, when you're in a school setting like this, the kind of process of what it takes to paint from life, because you have these life classes. But most people don't recognize the kind of, or it doesn't usually get spoken about, the kind of intimacy that happens in that encounter, like what it takes to sit with somebody, especially somebody that's not a model, professional model, and paint and look at every part of their materiality. I'm very interested not so much in trying to know as if I can know their stories. When I paint someone, they're doing all kinds of things. Sometimes, like, some of the people at the subway station were watching horror films while I was painting them. Like, they're like, and here I'm painting them, or they're doing all kinds of different things but oftentimes it is a very special time where they tell me, like, all kinds of things, all kinds of stories. They open up, because it's like a vulnerability of being seen very closely. And it's not necessarily that I'm bestowing visibility, but there has to be chemistry. They have to allow you to let them paint them. They have to give their image over to you in some ways. So it's like an opening, and it works with some people and it doesn't work with others. So and then it enters into another realm of representation, but that like just energy between the two of us is it's something very special, and I'm always outside of my level of comfort when I'm working with somebody new in that way.
And then your job is to show that.
To try to disclose it in like the nuance of color and detail that I show in their face, perhaps. And once they leave, I can paint the background and all that stuff.
You just use the phrase "sitting with" them, which I think is. When I looked at the videos of your work with the link, there seemed to be a lot of sitting with people, and there's lots of photos of you laughing with people. And can you talk about that as part of the process, or is it part of the process? The sitting with people and talking with them and sewing with them, the with part.
Yeah, most of these projects, or the ones that I showed, a lot of them are, where the practice is like creating this space, right? This sort of with certain parameters, right? Like, I will teach you to make protest banners. It could say whatever you need it to say. You could pick whatever fabric, whatever slogan, and you could take it, you could donate it, whatever. Right? And so, like, in that way, I see my practice not so much of these final pieces, but more of that sort of space that I create where we're making together and coming together, around a certain prompt or a certain something like protest, right? We're coming together around protest, and it isn't about what specifically you want to say, but we're here together to make together, right? And so a lot of my work is about that space that I'm creating, for expression, right? Like we can come together and vote together. You may not vote for the same candidate as me, but it's about creating that space to express together.
But you say on your website that not everybody agrees, so there may be somebody who's in a position, but you still work with them.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting position. I mentioned humor in relationship to you,
Mm-hmm.
and I would love to hear you and Guadalupe talk about, first, Guadalupe, can you talk about the 8-year-old boy who played on his way with the coyotes and a dog? I don't know where the dog comes into the story, but there was playfulness that you actually continue and honor in your work now. Can you talk about that? 'Cause I love that idea of in a difficult and sometimes horrific journey, there was play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I've learned a lot, I guess, with experience and just having to overcome a lot of things that even when things are dire and extremely challenging, there's humor in things, right? I guess like with, it's something really beautiful about children too, like something really horrific can be happening and they're still playing, right? So I guess that image that you're, so basically during my journey when I was going through from El Salvador all the way to the United States, I actually had a notebook and I used to play this children's game with the coyotes, with other children, and once I got to the border, I had a collection of them. It was like this. I wish I had this notebook. But yeah, so like this is something that distracts me from keeping me from facing reality. And the white dog, it's actually my mythology is coyote. It's like also folklore. It's kind of evolved into that. And basically, whenever a white dog presents himself to you at night, it's supposed to kind of protect you. And if it's a black dog, it doesn't mean the dog's bad, but it's a warning to watch out for. So that's what el coyote is. I'm sorry, el cadejo. So during my journey, when I was actually when I got to the border, I was in the back of a car with a coyote. He had a white dog, and the white dog got on top of me and covered me. And that's how I got across. And, Border Patrol didn't see me. And the white dog, the Mayan mythology, the folklore from El Salvador, el cadejo is what it's called, what got me here. So I use the white dog often as a metaphor, so that's what I guess the painting you're referring to.
Do you think that perspective for the two of you who purposely use humor and play in your work is part of the immigrant experience? Because in American mainstream culture, we tend to think, oh, this is terrible, I am suffering. You don't see laughing in the midst of trauma. But you both make sure that there is.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, like this performance I mentioned earlier, we're gonna finish with a giant like dancing scenario, right? Because it's so heavy. It's gonna be so heavy talking to my tumor and talking about my experiences. That also, this is something that I learned when I was a kid. When I was in the middle of a civil war, people still need to kind of dance and play and just kind of distract themselves from reality. It's not just like all like this heavy weight, and it's really important to kind of almost like that's the only out you have, and that's the only out a lot of people in Latin America have right now, is to actually still play and still dance and still kind of enjoy what they love doing. So it also reflects on the work too, right? It's part of the storytelling.
Yeah, I think, we're all complex human beings, and even like on our, like the depictions of trauma is that we're like sad all the time or like struggling the whole time, and maybe overall, but there's joy in every day, right? And laughter. And so I think that's definitely a part of it. But I think I also I think a lot about humor because it's, and particularly laughter, because it's just so complex of an emotion, You know, it's so instinctual and it comes from the gut, but to sort of decode it, I think it's very complex. And I was thinking about how I use humor. Definitely one way that I use humor is I see humor and laughter a lot as power, right? And my power. And I think I use humor to talk back, right? To be that call out queen, right? Because I can get away with a lot more, right? Rather than being like, you're racist, it's better to be like, I came here to take your job, you don't have one, ha ha ha, right? Like, it just hits a different way, and it like, I can get away with a lot more. And I use cuteness in my artwork in the same way, where I think those, for me, I could get away with more because I'm being cute and funny about it, right? And then a different kind of way that I sort of use laughter is, you know, when truth is just so distorted that the only thing that you can do is laugh, right? Like a lot of times these days when I watch the news, I just catch myself laughing a bunch. And it's not funny at all. It's like really, really bad and tragic. But it's sort of like, and I've been thinking about that, like, why am I laughing when things are like so effed up, right? And I think that for me, I see it as a powerful moment for myself, right? Empowering moment. Because I think for me, the reasons I laugh is sort of like it comes from a place where I'm like, I see you, right? I see you bending, I wrote some notes, but I was like, I see you sort of bending over backwards and like doing ridiculous things to like exert and to keep your power, right? And we see that in our administration. They do ridiculous things and they say the most asinine things. And like, my response to that is to laugh, right? And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And I see it as like a very powerful expression.
I also think, I totally agree that I think it's a liberatory force, you know, like humor or going dancing or something. It's a place that an institution cannot infringe on, you know. It's like a space that it's like a private, like a home or something, you know. Maybe the ICE can try to enter, but humor or like going out dancing or something is like a space that's liberatory, that's really political because of its kind of liberatory potential that you can't necessarily place where that potential goes or quantify it, but it's energy, I guess, in some way. Not energy, but just it's like vital force, I guess.
And I mean, you don't talk about humor and playfulness, and that might be something I'm imposing when I look at your work, but there seems to be a lightness and a playfulness in a lot of your images.
I don't know about humor, but I think there's playfulness maybe in the way that they're made, or there's playfulness in maybe some of the formal aspects. I mean, color-wise, I mean, this is just very formal, but they are very bright and colorful, and for me, it's like I don't ever, you might be able to relate, like I don't ever want to make as a woe is me, poor old immigrant sob story kind of work. I try to avoid that as much as possible. This feels a little too like gimmicky. So I want, even if I'm talking about a heavy subject, I sometimes, I like the idea of it not feeling so heavy and weighty. Because yeah, like you can have, I mean, when I came to America, we had $72 and we had like literally nothing, and I was super happy. I had no idea what was going on around me, you know, and you know, my parents were going through hell, but they kind of like kept the appearance of like everything's going fine. And I was so young, I was just like a happy kid because my parents made sure I was happy. So, and looking back, I'm like, man, how were they not like just crying constantly?
And now that you're a dad, you probably know the answer to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you know, but I think that's just part of being human. Like, you know, you can't just, you know, if you sit around being depressed about all the problems in the world 24/7, you'll never get out of bed.
Well, and that brings up another thing that I want to, you know, because there is trauma. There's trauma all around us right now. And a person that a lot of people in the audience will know is Kalima Young, both an artist and a scholar, interviewed African-American artists in Baltimore who very consciously faced trauma, absorbed trauma, and through their art recommunicated it in a form that they thought their audiences could more easily take. And actually, in a way, I think you were just talking about that. But I also think that some of your work, particularly yours, Guadalupe, speaks directly to trauma and that energy and work of the artist to then, I mean, when you think about what you just described, the performance art that's coming up, I mean, to me, that is energy work itself. Or is it?
Yeah,
Mike?
yeah. For me, definitely. But so I guess like because I've had so many experiences. It's really important that my work is somewhat empowering the immigrant as well, right? It's just like I'm not here. Obviously, I'm talking about everything that I talk about is autobiographical, but I'm also thinking of the future, right? So I'm also thinking of like how to empower immigrants, how to empower my story, because it'll give inspiration to someone that's just maybe getting started with that process, right? So talking about energy, and so it's like turning this really negative, difficult situation into a positive one. And this is like my own personal practice, but that's what I want my work to do.
So it's almost the reverse of what the African American artists, you're releasing trauma as opposed to absorbing.
I don't know about releasing the trauma, but it's definitely turning something that's really negative and dark into a positive.
And how would you respond to that with your portraits? I mean, in terms of to some degree, traumatized groups that you're working with and what your portraits do with them.
I mean, the early portraits I did, while I was painting some people, like they ended up disclosing all kinds of things about domestic violence. And at one point, with some of the women I was painting, I became like their translator with this council member. So there was like a very long arc where they would give me their image, I'd make a painting, then I'd think about how to give back to them. And sometimes it became like either classes or giving them a painting or like becoming a facilitator for them, so... But mostly, I mean, that was very early on when I was working with this one population, and then now I'm actually very amazed by the resilience I encounter more than, obviously there's a lot of trauma, but the amount of resilience and the kind of quotidian aspect of their daily lives, that it's mostly how are they resilient in their daily lives, and that's what I'm mostly like depicting, I think, and I'm not dealing so much with the trauma part at this point. But.
So Aram, you work with community, and the question of excellence comes up, because you're all academy artists, you're trained and you reach a certain level of technical skill. And we talked about this before, which is why I'm directing it to you, but feel free, anybody else to jump in. What is the balance in your work between technical excellence and community engagement? Because some people who are deeply community engaged don't worry about excellence. Like Mural Arts in Philadelphia has some storefronts where excellence is not what they're going for. But you seem to be having a conversation. Your work seems to be a conversation between those two.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it, I wouldn't put it with the term excellence, right? I would maybe think about like, I don't know, like, it's like a technical skill that, or technical, I don't know, I guess, yeah. Like technical skills that we learn certain skills in school or in like art, or we learn these skills and we see that these things are art, right? And I think for my work, there's some of that just because there's some of, my training, as you said, as like an academic artist, I guess, if I would call myself that, but it's, you know, I think, I don't know, it's like really important for me that people can approach my work, make something within a very short amount of time, right? It looks good, so they're proud of it, and, you know, but the sort of looking good part is almost secondary, right? So I don't know that I would like put the word excellence to it, because it is like, that is why I use fabric and like easily accessible, easily, like, if you know how to cut, then you know how to make a banner, right? And so it's available to all ages. And, you know, a lot of people who come already have like a lot of knowledge in fabric and sewing, but they didn't go to art school, right? And like, that's what I'm interested in having a conversation around, sort of breaking that barrier, actually, you know, to like not think about art as like this technical thing that you have to go to school to learn, right? I could teach you how to make a banner in an hour, and that's how I make the curtains and a bunch of my other work. So if you like, then you know how to make a bunch of my work already, you know, like we're using the same skills. And I think that's like important for me, that, you know, art becomes really, for me, the priority is accessibility, right? And for people to be like, I made a banner and, you know, and now I see it up in a museum, right? Because that's, yeah. So I don't know that it's excellence. I think it's just like, you know, and putting that word, I think, of excellence is like,
I thought your
yeah,
letters were excellent. I
yeah,
actually recently cut out some letters out of fabric.
stencils,
Yeah, well, see, there you go.
yeah, stencils,
I
yeah,
thought art school, my letters look terrible.
stencils.
I can talk about this a little bit. Like, a word that I use a lot when describing how I try to interact with the viewer is I'm always thinking about how do you seduce the viewer to want to spend time with the work. You know, when you go to a gallery, you're just like, yep, you just walk, you breeze by everything. And I'm always trying to use formal techniques or moves to try to slow people down. I think a lot of, and all this isn't about necessarily the content. It's very formal, but it's a way to get people to engage. You know, my hope is to have people engage with the work formally first, and as they spend more time with it, then maybe the content unravels. So that's why I like the work's like very obsessive and meticulous, and it reads very different when you get up close and you see it's made out of like millions of little marks. But it reads more graphic from far away. So I'm always trying to like seduce the viewer to stay with it as long as possible.
I mean, that's a fascinating statement when you're talking about portraits, because in the traditional sense, the portrait was supposed to be pretty and flattering, but you're using, I'm not going to say pretty, but you're using...
I like pretty.
Okay, all right, I'll use pretty. You're using the pretty to draw the viewer in, and holding them so that they stay a while.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of people that look at my stuff and be like, it's horrible. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to capture a beauty in the mundane and the everyday, and also these people's life stories, and kind of deconstruct it and put it back together, put it under the umbrella of the history of painting. And also, one thing I wanted to say was about what I said earlier was, I agree with everything you said about like the power of art. I mean, I think art is super powerful, and that's why it ties into seduction. What I meant more was, I don't know if knocking on doors to get people to register to vote is as effective as making a painting for like pushing the political goal forward. But I definitely do believe that like, artwork is extremely powerful, but it just works in a different, it's a slower read.
I see what you're saying. I also wanted to chime in on that. Like, I think even something as subtle as color, you know, is is hugely like, to me, color is like one of the hardest things. It's so, like, having good color is really, really difficult. And not that I say I have good color, but I just think that aesthetics is not disconnected from from things that are political. You know, having like a deep kind of aesthetic experience is like kind of something that moves your mind in a political way. It's like the moment of a kind of revolutionary potential or something, if that's not like a weird, huge overstatement. But I think that like these aesthetic experiences are what kind of give you a moment of reprieve from some kind of other instrumentalized experience, I think.
Guadalupe, you want to jump in here? Because your work, I mean, partly because of your cultural heritage, is a conversation about the grotesque.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess my work, it just depends whether it's the performance or a sculpture. I mean, I've been shown like a little tortilla painting, and I find excellence in the tortilla making itself. You know, there's the Mexican tortillas, which are really thin, but the Salvadoran tortillas are really thick, right? And there's a whole technique, and there's a clapping that needs to happen when you make it. And I had this like 90-year-old lady teach me how to make them back in the day. So there's definitely a type of excellence with even the tortilla making itself that tortilla makers take pride in, right? So yeah, like when I was learning, she would be like, no, eso no sirve, you know, like do it again. And I keep trying to figure it out.
Excellence.
Yeah, excellence. But the same, so the same pertains to when I'm making a sculpture, right? It's kind of subjective because it looked grotesque, but then to me it's not. I'm just so pre-calculated with where everything is placed. But that's the appearance to the outside. So, I mean, again, I don't know if excellence is the right word, like everyone's saying here, but yeah, there's a type of, you know, certain things need to be kind of welded together for it to function properly, right? So, like, there has to be a type of excellence there, because if not, this sculpture is going to collapse, right? So it's like, so I do take pride in the craftsmanship of how things are made. Yeah.
Did anybody want to say anything else? We're going to go to question and answer in a minute, but I want to make sure that if there's anything that you, in our conversation, you wanted to say along the way, that you get to say that. You good? Okay.
Well, I think something I want to talk about is, you know, there's sort of some questions amongst the discussion about, you know, the power of art, you know, and I think that art is really powerful, and I like took some notes before, so I might have to look at this. But, you know, I was thinking about the ways that art can be really powerful and can ultimately impact change, right, or create change. And I was thinking about like the sort of different things that you could do in art that is hard to do in other places, right? Like with art, you know, you can sort of play around with who is centered or like what is centered and the framing, right? Because we all know society and histories and stories are framed a certain way and center certain people, right? And so to undo that and sort of move that frame, right, is really powerful, right? And art is really powerful in its abilities to tell stories, right? Of stories that aren't told, right? Going back to representation, right? Stories that actually are actively forgotten, right? Or suppressed, right? In order to tell stories of our own, right? Being able to use art to tell our own truths, that's super powerful, right? It's powerful in how it can push back, right? And that's what I try to do a lot of in my work, right? To undo structures of power and oppression, right? It's powerful in its abilities for imagination, right? Creating alternate pasts, futures, and presents, right? Presents and futures, right? Which is you're talking about, right? And like, so I think in those ways, like art doesn't have a certain outcome that's quantifiable, right? Which like our oppressive society wants things that are quantifiable. But why does our administration, why do so many like cultural, or like, why does power try to suppress art all the time? Right? It's because art is really powerful in these sorts of ways, right? So I think that, knocking on doors is effective, right? But we also need to create art, and that it's all part of change. Yeah, so I just wanted to
Well said, and particularly in the age of Trump, when so many other spheres of communication are shut down or punished, that role becomes even more important, I think. So, questions? Are there mics from people in the audience? Where are they? Up? Okay. So, okay, yeah, house lights help. Thanks. Right here. The mic is coming to you.
Oh, I probably don't even need a mic.
Yeah, for the people in the back, you probably do.
First of all, is it on? Hello, hello.
Yeah, it's on now, yeah.
Yeah, hello.
Oh, maybe not.
Maybe not.
No, it doesn't seem to work.
You want to grab one?
Yeah, take one of these.
You can grab mine. I'm not-
La la la.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. It's really fantastic to see you all sitting up there and hear you talking to each other and to us. There's many things, but I am very interested, Guadalupe, in the project that you're describing at Knockdown Center. And when you started to talk about all of the aspects of it, being in a kind of exhibition space or performance space. And I think about healthcare, like the sort of grotesquerie that healthcare has become in this country, who has access, pharmaceutical companies, I mean, on and on. And then I think also about the sort of European trajectory of the notion of value as it's related to art, right? The inheritance that the art object is a kind of value, has value or is automatically valued. And it seems like a really compelling aspect of that particular performance that is coming on the horizon, that somehow these signs of healthcare you're moving them into the gallery, and so kind of asking us to consider what can be an object of value, or how has the grotesque way that healthcare operates in this country maybe created an opening where these kinds of things can move into the gallery and be discussed, as having value. Like healthcare as an art object.
Totally. No, this one works. Thank you. I guess, I agree with everything you said. I don't know if is that a question?
The content of your work as both sort of art object in a kind of historic way and sort of political opportunity, or
Right. Yeah. No, I think I'm not sure really what you're asking, but I can kind of talk about. But yeah, I think that we're living in really exciting times that as artists that everything is open, right? There's so many different possibilities, and yeah, I've actually I'm back of my head. I want to go visit the radiation machine that killed my cancer, right? At some point, I have it. It was like this new technology in New York City. It was this beautiful white machine, and it had digital screens of autumn leaves falling. And this is what I was looking at when the radiation was killing the tumor, right? The chemotherapy did nothing to it. but the radiation killed it. And I kind of had these visions of, and I used to go there and just meditate and look up, and I used to see the fallen leaves, these digital leaves falling on top of me, right? So that eventually will make it to a piece somewhere, as a performance or a sculpture or whatever, right? But yeah, it is a big part of it, and it's extremely political too. I was very lucky to walk out of there with no debt, because I was a student at the time when I had cancer. I was doing my thesis when I was overcoming cancer, but I could have very easily walked out of there like $500,000 worth in debt, right? So it's like, this is like, yeah, so like that's the other side of the spectrum, right? As far as politics, I'm not just talking about the border, but also, how corrupted how corrupted healing is in this Western kind of world that we live in.
I wanted to say one thing about that. I also think it's really interesting how one sees more and more like kind of care ethics and practices of care entering into the art world. And it's really so interesting to see how this is like really kind of a new vanguard in some ways. And it's like really exemplified in your work, I think.
Over there. We just do this so you can run back.
Yeah, I get my steps in.
Thank you. So this is kind of like an open question for the whole panel. So if something the age of Trump has kind of brought up in all of us is kind of this sense of emergency and improvisation, right? So like when the travel ban happened, I remember a lot of lawyers going to the airports and donating their time and people protesting. I remember when the Hurricane Maria happened, then Trump didn't want to release money, then people were like donating works and making auctions and then raising money for these things. And then at the same time, in artistic processes, which also is reflected in most of your artistic processes, it's processes that take time, that follow a different speed than this reactionary speed that Trump is imposing us. So I would be curious to hear from all of you, how do you conciliate those two things, right? Like this push to like respond immediately versus, your processes that take time.
Is art slow?
Hello? Minus.
Yeah, I think I was always making work about immigration and immigrant identity before Trump, right? Because one of the projects I was working on before was sewing the citizenship questions with non-citizens, and then each of them being on sale for the cost of applying for citizenship, right? With that full amount going to the maker as a gesture to maybe go toward their citizenship or whatever they wanted to go toward. And so I was working on that project for many years before Trump happened, but that project, I still am working on that project, but it sort of had to go on hold because there was sort of, we're not there yet, right? I mean, I sold a bunch as soon as Trump was elected to be able to hopefully get people's applications in if they could. But, the focus of my time became more about, protests and now voting, right? And so in a way, there was definitely a shift, right? Because we didn't have time to sew and learn the citizenship questions when we are sort of dealing with these emergencies. And, with the protest banners, it's funny because they're pretty quick, right? You can make one in, 2 hours. I'm a pro, so I could make one in an hour or less. But anyways, they're pretty quick, but even then, there was so many moments where it was really frustrating because just things were changing so quick that I couldn't even keep up, And so, I mean, I think that's it definitely influences or like plays a role in my practice, this sort of urgency and responding to emergency. But I think at first I was doing a lot more of that, and now it feels like such a tactic, right, of like the administration, right? And we see that, like, as soon as certain things happen, then they throw a bunch of other things on top of it. And so I've been trying to also like take care of myself and not be so reactionary, right?
Yeah, my work is really slow. Like that mural that I did in Brixton took me 3 months, and I was in residence in Brixton for 3 months, and not only did the painting take 3 months, but the people would come by, and when I'm painting them, like 6 hours each or so, and they fall asleep sometimes, and there's all kinds of things of like how we talk to each other and how slow that interaction is, and how they would have a say in the painting coming together. So it's a pretty slow process.
For me, it can be really, really slow, but also really fast. We can put together a performance in an hour if we want. So, yeah, so it just varies.
And also, when you were talking about the chaos, and because the art is presented, it creates not order, but a form to the chaos in a way that's probably useful. I want to make sure that there's nobody in the back being shy. Okay, all right. Right here. Oh, okay. Okay. You're next.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and a special thanks to Aram for the last thing you said on the panel. I feel like it was on the tip of my tongue, and I was just hoping that, like, I knew that it was in you to say it. All of those things, because that's all what your work is about. And so thanks for making sure that was included in the conversation. And, you know, one thing that's so important about your work is, like you said, centering people that haven't been centered, and creating these organizing spaces for conversations, and making sure they're accessible so that people aren't deterred by thinking, oh, I'm not an artist, I can't do that. So thanks. But I wanted to ask you if your practice has changed since you became a US citizen in how you're approaching art making and these sort of community organizing events and your outward facing practice. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's sort of recent. I mean, I became a citizen 2 years ago, I think. I sort of freaked out when Trump got elected and then applied right away. And obviously I had the privilege to be able to do that. And I think I'm still sort of thinking through how it's influenced my work, you know? But I think definitely, I think in the last year, like, my works have definitely been a bit more talking back, right? And calling out. And I think that it's become more aggressive in a way. And I think that's because I have that safety and that privilege to call out and be aggressive, you know? For example, I have these stickers, a sticker project called Put It on Blast, Call It Out and Label It. And they're these really cute stickers, and they say things like #1 racist, and fake. One of my favorite ones is like a finger that says "fake woke," right? This like idea that you could just go around the world and just like label all the bullshit around you, you know? And I think like that tone is sort of new for me, and I think that is partly due to being a citizen, having that sort of security and safety to be like, you know, and also that I'm like, you know, an Asian American, you know, femme cutie who like people don't expect to be aggressive or angry or call them out on stuff. And I also use that to like dismantle my cuteness, right? To like dismantle white supremacy, right? I mean, I try, right? So, yeah, that sort of aggressive tone is comes with my citizenship, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna be nice to, I said you in the back, we're gonna take the one that's, there was a hand down here, and then we'll take you, if that's okay. So we don't have her.
We were pointing.
Oh, okay, all right, so, yes.
Thank you for coming, MICA. So I have a general question. Is anyone being denied your work for a high political content through your career?
No, I actually think it's probably the opposite. I think, you know, the art world is mostly very progressive and liberal, and so I would say probably people have more opportunities to talk about it.
I would say that with my work, it hasn't, I don't know about being denied flat out, but there are times where there is sort of gestures to censor the work, right? So like, you know, and sometimes it maybe makes a bit of sense, right? Like if the space is predominantly for kids and like all the banners say like, F you, you know? You know, like, then, you know, that makes a bit of sense. But I think the one thing that I've experienced is that a lot of art spaces being like nonprofits, they can't be partisan or they can't show that they're partisan. So they'll tell me, you can't include the banners that say dump Trump, for example. Right? Or Trump is a sleazy motherfucker, right? Or something like that. They'll be like, you can't include those because we can't come off as partisan, right? Even the voting stations, they're like, you can't advocate for any specific, you know, it was funny because we did an event in 2016 at a museum, and we had, you know, piñatas, and we were like, bashing these piñatas, and we were doing a bunch of performances for the viewing party, and they were like, you can't have just a Trump piñata, you have to also have a Hillary piñata. And we were like, yeah, duh, you know? But like, so like, there's been some of that, which, you know, is interesting, I think. And so not necessarily denying of my work, or like, but sort of a soft, like, no, I wouldn't even say soft, right? Like, definitely like a censoring of some of the work, right? Yeah.
Okay. All the way back.
Yes, hello. As a person of color, of an artist, and also an immigrant coming from Honduras, I feel like this lecture really began to resonate with me, especially learning how to navigate the art world as a person of color in this political context. But I do have to be sincere in the fact that I feel a little bit frustrated that you guys centered this lecture around you guys' content and body of work, and not around your own personal experiences as people of color and immigrants in the context of the art world. Because if we really take in consideration the people that are present, a good chunk of us are minorities. And I think that learning a little bit about how you guys personally overcame certain hurdles as immigrant people of color would have been a lot more helpful than just exposing your body of work.
Does somebody want to speak about their personal honesty?
Do you have a specific question or like a specific thing that?
I just hope to know more about your own personal experiences and obstacles that were brought upon you in the context of being an immigrant person of color.
That's all I've been talking about.
I think are you asking like, have we had problems gaining entry into the art world?
Yeah, because a lot of...
I got what you're saying. So honestly, I haven't had any problems because I'm Iranian American, like gaining access to the art world. Like no one's been like, sorry, brown guy, you can't come in or you can't exhibit here. Again, the art world's, I mean, historically, you go into a museum, it's a lot of white, male, straight artists, but I feel like right now, there seems to be an interest in artists of color or of different genders and things like that. So, yeah, I can't pinpoint like.
So do you want to hear the I guess with me when I was doing my BFA, I was the only person of color in the whole school, the only one. I had no. This is in New York too. This is at SVA in New York City, 1999 to 2003. I was the only person of color in the whole school, right? So when I tried to talk about my identity and my experiences, the professors and my colleagues would turn around and just didn't want to hear it, right? They want to talk formally about those things. So those obstacles were bigger then. Now the art world is definitely diversifying, and there's definitely a lot more opportunity, especially for you guys. You can look around the room. There's a lot of people of color in the room, and you do have a support. And usually universities are diversifying as much as possible. So I do think that there's definitely more opportunities on even getting into school, but also there's a lot of opportunities in the art world because it's really progressive. And we're at this point, we want to hear everyone's voices. We want to hear the voices that, I'm talking about we, because I'm a professor. So when someone is applying to grad school at VCU, I'm really interested in hearing the voices that have not been heard ever in the art world. And yeah, so right now I think there's it's actually a really good time to be a person of color in the art world.
I mean, I sort of disagree, or I think it's very complicated, right? And, certain things that I experience with my work is, or certain hurdles or difficulties is because of the political nature of my work and sort of the, creating this open space where we could sort of address certain concerns together or whatever. Sometimes predominantly white institutions will invite me as sort of, and you can sort of tell that they don't understand my work. They they don't know who my artwork is for, right? And I'm very clear that I'm centering immigrants of color and I'm centering those disenfranchised people. Right? But they sort of are oh, we want you to come in and do a big workshop for the Women's March, right? And I'm that's not who I'm making artwork for, right? But they sort of there is some of the because there is a push for having more diversity and representation in the art world, there are some times where I feel people are just asking me and not really understanding my work and what it's trying to do so that it can, so they could check off that box that we did include a person of color, right? So there's sometimes that happens. That's frustrating, But, in terms of overall opportunities, I think it is the arts is doing much better, right? In terms of recognizing that there is a need for diversity. But I think it could do much, much better, right?
I have experienced the opposite in a way, kind of you're white and you're not Mexican, and so it's how can the diversity of how many multiplicities we can have inside us, of our identities, where it's you don't perform the type of identity that you're supposed to, or that a Mexican is supposed to, you don't look like one, so you're not, and I was I'll show you my passport, or it's just what you have a right to show, and how the definitions of identity are so limited still because people don't understand Latino culture in its fullness in a way, and how you can be Jewish Mexican, or how you can have a multiplicity of different identities. That's also hard in the art world to understand sometimes.
All right, well, first, please join me in thanking our panelists. And Tony, did you need to say anything? Okay, well, good night.